Hi guys, Rob from Rob's Model Cars, and welcome back to part 4 of how to build the hobby design LB Works Audi R8. Now, if you watched the last part 3, I showed you how to disassemble the Kyosho Audi R8 model, and since then I've stripped all the paint and taken it back to its raw die-cast finish. Now what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you how to fit all the resin wide body flares on the car, and also there's a little bit of modification to the die-cast body as well. So let's get started. So I'm going to show you on the left hand side of the car, but I have already fitted the flares on the right hand side, and this is basically how they look. So the rear flare is quite simply attached. It does overlap the side blade a little bit, but we'll get into that later on. And the front part is in 3 pieces because the whole hood raises up on the Audi. There's a top part on the side of the hood or the bonnet, a smaller piece on the front bumper, and a small piece here at the back of the front wheel arch. So that's basically how it's going to end up looking. It looks a little bit weird here how it sets back, but that is how it is on the real car, and there's a bit of die cast that we have to remove here, so I'll show you that when we get to the other side. So let's make a start then. So if we dig out the pieces, we'll start with the rear flare. As with all hobby design parts, they usually do have a little tab on there which is used to grab it with a clip to be able to paint it. I don't like to paint these parts separately. I like to actually fix them onto the model and paint the model in one go. That way you've got no worries about any accidents with any glue seeping out onto fresh paint. And this flare is basically going to, this part here lines up with the bottom of the sill. It does step down a little bit here. And that is for the side skirt extension to clip into. So you can see this side skirt, how it's got a little cutout there. That will actually, I'll show you actually, that actually slips in there. And that is basically how, trying to hold that, that is basically how the side sill connects into that rear fender. So just bear in mind that the majority of the fender here lines up with the bottom of the sill. Now you can use your fingers and feel the flare flush with the inside of the die-cast body, and a good idea is to actually use a marker. Let me just grab a marker, and once that's lined up, it's always good to use an index mark so you know where the flare is going to sit. There is a little panel line here in the die cast, so I'm just going to mark a little line there so that I know when I glue this fender on, if I line up that little index mark that I've just made, I know that bottom of the flare is going to be flush with the sill, and it's going to fit right. So that's basically how it's going to go. So let's glue this rear flare on. So again, I'm using the Bob Smith Industries Maxi Cure glue. This is an extra thick super glue. It's got a really good bond of resin to die cast. I went through a lot of different glues to find ones that actually worked good on resin, and I'm just going to give it basically not a really heavy bead. I'm just going to spread it around onto the flare. Use the nozzle to just spread it around a little bit. I don't put the glue too close to the edge because I don't want it to all ooze out, but you can clean that off later as well with some debonder. So once the glue's on there, I'll use that little mark, index mark, and I will actually put my fingers on the inside and make sure that it's lining up where it should be. So you've got a little bit of time to work with this glue. It's got around a 10 to 25 second grab. Sometimes it grabs a little bit quicker. I'll just check that. And that's basically it. So they do fit very well to the body. So I'm just going to hold that a little bit longer there. And yeah, it bonds really easily to the body. So that's the rear flare on. Okay, so now we'll tackle the front. So as you saw on the other side, this is actually made up by 3 pieces. So I should point out that I've actually reattached the hood to the model. There's just a black bracket underneath which holds that hood in place. I just want to make sure that that is aligned so that when we stick the flares on now, when the model is painted and reassembled, they're going to line up. You definitely want to do that. And then this flare is quite a simple one. It's just going to line up with the bottom edge of the hood at the back and where the join is at the front. So what I'll do, because this is going to line up flush with the back of the hood here, I'll actually open up the hood a little bit and then we'll apply some glue to the back of the flare and then we'll stick that onto the hood. So again, Bob Smith Industries Maxi Cure glue. You don't need a lot of this stuff, but you just want to make sure that the flare is glued to the body well and you don't have any gaps that you have to fill with paint. And we're just going to line it up with the back and then line it up with the front underside edge of the hood. Just got to position it right, and then that's about it. So as you can see, it does follow the contour of the hood, and that's basically in place. So as you can see, it's easier to do that with the hood raised slightly so that you can line up those bottom edges. You've pretty much got the back corner to line up to, but it's the front edge there that's easier to line that up with the hood open. Now that that's actually glued on, we can close that hood down and then we can actually glue the next 2 pieces up and meet that piece. So the next piece we're going to glue on is the small front piece, which is the front part of the flare, and that is just going to glue on like so. So I'll actually, when I glue this on, I'll actually hold the hood down and I'll glue this up tight, because when it does get painted, it will close up super tight. So that piece, you just have to line up the inside of the wheel arch here and that front edge, but the pieces line up perfectly. There's no problem there. Just watch you don't get too much glue on your fingers, or any glue on your fingers. And again, we're just going to apply a little bit of glue, not too much, just spread it around with the nozzle, and then we'll put it into position. So as I say, I leave just a tiny little gap between them, not a huge gap, because the paint is just not that thick. The paint is always measured in microns. So you can, I don't know whether you can see that with the light there. With the hood down, it's a tiny little gap. And that's it. So that is the front part of the front flare. And when the hood opens up, that part is on the bumper bar. So that's really easy. So that's the majority of the flare kit fitted. We just have to fit this piece on the other side, and this is the part that's going to require some cutting of the die cast. Now, as you can see, it is such a narrow little piece, and that's actually got to line up with the back edge of the panel. I'll show you the other side. You can see this lines up with the back edge of the panel here, and on the other side, it's all die cast. So we've got to remove quite a bit of that die cast. And this little piece might be a bit hard to see. I'm going to colour this in with a texture so you can see the shape of this. So you can see there, hopefully, there's a little checked out piece at the back. Now that's the back of this piece, and this is the part that lines up with the back of the panel here. So what we have to do is we have to cut, I'll mark this with the texter, we have to leave just a tiny bit of die cast on the back, and we have to basically cut all this piece out. Okay, so you can see that there. We're just leaving a little bit of die cast on the back here, and this piece will sit on that die cast edge. There's a little groove. There's a little groove there in the back of this piece. So yeah, we're going to leave, you can see where I haven't coloured in black, we've got a tiny edge of die cast here, and we're going to have to use the Dremel and a cutting wheel to cut some of this out. Now I'll take the hood off in a minute and show you, but what we have to do is we have to cut through here, just down to the line of the sill. So we're going to use a cut-off wheel, or actually what I'll do now, you need to cut that with the hood removed. So we'll take this bracket back off, and that will release the hood, and we can take the hood off. Now that the fender flare's stuck onto both sides of the hood and the front piece on the bumper bar is glued on, we don't need that hood in place, and the hood just comes out. So you can see that's got the left and right flares on the hood, and then we've got the front piece here. Not sure whether you can see that. You can sort of see that there. You can see where the resin part, I'll go closer, you can see where the resin part here actually has got to go into where the die cast is. So on this side, I'll colour that in with a texture as well. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. It's about 3mm thick on the top. That's the side view there, so you can see just a tiny bit of die cast here. And if we go into the wheel arch here, it's about 3mm here. So I'm going to use the cut-off wheel on the Dremel, and I'm going to do a long cut down through this way, across through the top, and then down through the wheel arch here. So it's going to be quite messy, so I'm going to go and do that in the workshop, and then I'll come back in and I'll show you how that's cut out before we stick the flare on. Okay, so I've cut this part of the metal die cast body out, and you can see here where it's super shiny, where I've actually cut it out. Now what I've done here, I've just used the Dremel with a cut-off wheel, and I just start first by slicing down the back edge, just leaving that 1mm of metal on the back edge. So I do a cut through that way, a cut through the top which is flush with the inner well here, and then I also go through the inside of the wheel arch. So I'll actually come in and cut through here as well. So if you just keep your cut-off wheel flush with that inner well, that's where it's supposed to be. You can see there. Now I've kept the little piece as well to show you guys. So that's the little triangular piece that's come out, and that's where it sits. So you can see what I'm trying to remove, just cutting down vertically and in through the side of the wheel well, and the little part through the top. So that's the piece that's come out of there, and then that enables this resin part to lip over that last bit of die cast at the back where it meets the door. And that's basically where it's going to sit. So you can see there's quite a bit of die cast here that has to be removed. I've removed most of that on this side. There's still a little bit left there, but I'll glue this part on next, and then I'll come back with the sanding wheel on the Dremel and I'll sand out all of that metal. So what we want to do, again, before I glue this part on, I want to refit the hood, just so we know everything lines up how it should be. So it's quite an easy process again. We'll just put the hood through there, make sure that lines up, get those struts out of the way. I think that's about right. No, something's not quite right there. Okay, so I got that hood back on. It was just creating some little issues. The little black struts in there, which is still attached to the hood, they were just fouling on the inside. So I've lined those back up, and that is the hood back attached. Now this is ready to glue this piece on, and you can see that that will just meet up with the underside of the flare. It has a little bit of a lip on there, so I'll just use my file and I'll just take that little dag off. That's all it needed there. And again, we'll just glue this in place. So you can see it lines up with the bottom of the door, the top of the sill there. And again, I'll just leave a very small gap, maybe like 1/3 of a millimeter. And instead of applying the glue to this piece, which I will get it all over my fingers, I'll actually apply it to the body this time. So just on the top edge, on that back edge of the die cast metal, and then in that cutout that I've cut out with the Dremel. And then we can just basically put that into position, make sure that that's lined up nice and tight, and go a little bit higher. And I've still got some black texture on there, so that gap looks bigger than it is. Right, actually. There we go. I'll just put a bit of pressure on that just to hold it until the glue goes off. So yeah, hopefully you can see that there. We've basically taken about 3 millimeters of metal out, and the idea is that this little lower extension of the flare, it does stick out a little bit past the fender, but it's like that on both sides. I'm probably just going to sand that a little bit down just to make it a little bit flusher, but the real car looks a bit like that as well. So that's basically glued into position. So you can see on this side here is the same there. So it does angle out a little bit that way, both those pieces, and that is basically the front and rear flares onto the Audi R8 body. Now, next thing is the rest of this die cast. So I'll colour this in again in texture so you can see what I'm talking about. Oh, it's a bit harder to see now actually, but you get the idea. So where I've coloured that in, that is the die cast that we have to remove. So I'm just going to use a sanding drum on the Dremel and grind that out. Okay, so what I've done, I've just used the sanding drum on the Dremel wheel, and I've just basically taken that excess out with the Dremel. So I've just run the sander around here and taken out that little bit of extra die cast. You can again see where it's shiny there. That's where I've taken the meat out. So it doesn't really affect the structural properties of the model. It just opens up that wheel arch, and I've done that both sides. So you can see that side there. When that's painted matte black in there, you won't see that. So actually you can see that better there. So you can see that we've opened that section up there on both sides. I've done that side as well. And then so when the wheel actually fits in there, when the car is very low, like all LB cars, it won't foul that part of the bodywork. I guess that's why they cut it. And again, when the wheel steers, you need that extra bit of room there when the car is so low, something that Audi never planned on when they designed this car. So that is all of the body panels fitted. Now there's a couple of other things I need to do to this body. With the Kyosho model, they actually cast in the Audi rings in the front hood. So this I'm going to file off because you get some photo etched Audi logos if you want to put them back on. And there's also one you can probably. The rest of it's pretty straightforward. It does have a ducktail rear wing as well. Now this model does have the pop-up rear wing. I'm not sure whether on the LB cars that stays a pop-up wing, but the ducktail spoiler will just glue onto the top of that wing, so I'll do that later off camera, but that's pretty straightforward. Again, just screw the wing back in place with the brackets underneath, and then just glue that wing onto that top piece, and then you can unscrew the bracket, remove the wing, that way you can put a clamp on there and hold that and actually paint this piece. So that's basically just going to glue onto that metal spoiler. So that's really the only other pieces. As I say, colour, so they're going to be white. They'll just slot on like that, and they'll go back on during assembly. So so that'll be painted body colour as well. I'm going to add some carbon fibre decal too, but I'll show you that in another video, how to apply the carbon fibre decals. So other than that, this body is pretty much ready. Once I file off these Audi logos and glue this rear wing piece on, it's ready to send it out into the paint shop and get some paint on this body. Now another note with the painted stuff, I couldn't find a way to carefully take out the rear window, so this is the actual hatch part of the model. Obviously the blue, it was the Golf colour. So what I've done, I've just masked up the rear window, the inside of the hatchback. I've just scuffed this up with some 320 grit sanding sponges to get it nice and smooth, and I'm just going to prime this and then spray colour on that, and then I can remove all the masking for the rear windows. And I've done that the same with the doors as well. I did try to remove the plastic door trim on the inside. I'm not sure whether they're all glued on these models, but these ones seem to be glued on and did not want to come off. It was starting to deform the actual plastic door trim with no signs of the actual door trim popping off. So in this case, again, I've left the window and the door trim on. I've just masked up the window and masked up the door trim on the inside, and again I've just sanded the original paint with 320 grit 3M sanding sponges, and I'll just apply some undercoat and then spray the colour on these parts and then just remove all the masking. So if you do this method, just make sure that you have fully covered up these windows, because you don't want to get any overspray onto the windows. That would ruin the model. So that's pretty much all the pieces ready for paint. So I've got the doors, the rear hatch, the body, the rear wing, the aero parts. Can't forget the little mirrors. I've got the little 2 mirrors that have to paint. I'm going to actually paint this model in white, and I'm actually going to do colour-coded white wheels. So these are some 2-piece wheels that I've got. They're a Vossen wheel. So I'm going to paint the centres white on these as well. So I've got the centres to paint. And that will be the next step. So that's it for today's part 4 of how to build the hobby design LB Works Audi R8. Stay tuned for part 5, where I will have the body all painted, and then we'll start assembling this bad boy. And we do have to do some carbon fibre parts also. As I mentioned, I will do the rear aero diffuser, the Liberty Walk aero diffuser will be done in carbon fibre. And of course on the Audi we've got the famous side blades. Now I'm going to do these in carbon fibre as well. They'll actually just sit in behind the flare. I may as well show you that now. So I'm going to remove the fuel flap from the left hand side of the car. I'm going to paint these black, and then I'm going to apply some carbon fibre decal on them, and possibly put the Liberty Walk, the LB logo on there as well, and then we'll clear coat these at the same time as I clear coat all the body. So I've had a few requests for people to show how I do my carbon fibre, so I'll maybe do a separate video on how to apply carbon fibre decals to parts, so stay tuned for that in a separate video. But otherwise, you'll catch me on part 8 will be painted, and then we'll start going through the steps of reassembly and what other customizations and mods we can do to this model, and get this one finished. So if you're new to the channel, I do mostly custom models, We do a lot of new supercar model reviews and a few other supercar related things also. So thanks for watching and stay tuned to Rob's Model Cars.